So, good afternoon. Welcome to Orleans United Church. We are here this afternoon for, I guess, circle one of a three-circle community circle learning on, I guess, a humorous look at the pandemic and how it's maybe driving us a little bit crazy even. Today's presentation is called "There's a Mosquito in My Ear," right? Which I think is a really good illustration of what it's been like, perhaps now for some people, as we have adjusted over 20 months into month 21 coming up of this way of life. Just before we get started, just a couple of things for the people at home. We are going to be taking a break in between because of things like informed consent and not wanting to put people's personal lives on YouTube. So today's recording and the two recordings that will be coming after this are just the content. So if you have any questions and you're related to Orleans United Church, then please get a hold of Carolyn Penhale or Luc La Madeleine, and they'll either address your concerns directly or get a hold of me and we can address those concerns. And if you are getting a hold of this presentation through the St. Andrew's United Church Facebook page, well, then you can message us directly there, and I'll be happy to answer your questions there. Which leads me just to introducing myself very, very briefly. So my name is Eric Lukacs. I am a United Church minister. I started student ministry in 2001. And was ordained in 2004. I have been in Ottawa since 2016. I am the minister at St. Andrew's United Church in Buckingham, Quebec, on the other side of the river. And I also am in my final year of completing my Master's of Counseling, Psychotherapy, and Spirituality at St. Paul's University, where I am now an intern counselor at their student clinic. And today's presentation will be much more focused on what I would consider to be the psychology of dealing with the pandemic and not so much the spirituality. Not that spirituality doesn't have anything to do with it, but we only have a certain amount of limited time. And if you have more questions about where your faith intersects, that's certainly something you can pick up with Carolyn or you can pick up with me. Also, even though we're going to be taking a lighthearted look at this topic, we all know that the pandemic is affecting different people in different ways. If you're at home or you're here today and you are in any way, shape, or form triggered, like you go home and tomorrow morning, all of a sudden you find that you're overcome by emotions that are a little bit heavier than you would have thought, that's something that you should pay attention to. So tell a friend, tell Carolyn, if you're a member here, tell myself if you're picking this up on Facebook, and that's not to be alarmist, it's just to be responsible. All right. Okay, so we're going to make a start. There's a slide presentation that goes along with all of this, and we will make it available to you after it's put up on YouTube, either through the mailing list at Orleans United Church or through our Facebook page at St. Andrew's. So let's start now with an overview. We know that the last 20 months have left their mark on people, but what we don't really know yet, and when I say we, I am talking about people who deal with mental health, is exactly what kind of a mark. It's pretty safe to say that it's been different for everybody. And we can also say that there are certain trends that are appearing. And so this whole series is about taking a lighthearted look at that, those are the trends, to figure out where you're at, what's working for you, and maybe what's not working so well. Today, Circle 1, we'll focus on the general impact of what the pandemic is having on our moods, and we're going to offer 3 tricks or tools to help make things a little bit easier. In our next segment, which will be taking place next week, that's Circle 2, we'll focus on how our relationships are, or maybe not so much, adjusting. And in our final installment, we'll focus on developing new habits based on your values, whether they're your personal values or the values that you live out in community, whether that's family, your church, a social club, whatever that happens to be. So, are you like me? Do you have days where you are just waking up with stress even though you're not really sure why? Are there times when you have less patience than others? Are there times that you think you've gotten a good night's sleep and like you are really still tired? Maybe you or someone you know is feeling like this. Maybe there are other things that you or the person that you know are feeling, and you're not alone. Very recently, when I was coming through my office in Beechwood at Mackay United Church, I picked up the community newspaper from Manor Park, and there was an article that had suggested that in their neighborhoods, Beechwood and Manor Park, incivility was starting to rise. I don't know if you've noticed that in your stores here in Orleans. Certainly, we've talked about that in Buckingham, people being short-tempered with each other in line and so on and so forth. And I had to chuckle because certainly, without actually meaning to, I was part of that issue. I'm going to take you through a sort of little demonstration of what that's like, and maybe you can tell me if you can relate. And I was going shopping at the Metro in Beechwood. So the reason why I mention a Metro is, I don't know if you're aware of that, familiar with that neighborhood, but we'll admit that it's a pretty upscale neighborhood. And so generally speaking, when you go in there, people conduct themselves in a certain way. Everybody is very standoffish because people are just in there to do their business and they leave, and there's not a whole lot of socializing. So I went in that day just to pick up a frozen pizza. And I didn't expect to be there very long, and I come down the aisle where I go, and all the freezers are there. And then I come, and there's this fellow standing there right in front of the freezer. You know, like when you're opening the fridge door and you're kind of looking, and you're looking, and you're looking, and you know you want something, but, right? Well, so he's standing there, but that's not just where it ends. He's got this toque on, and it's like pulled down like right like to his forehead, right around his ears and back. And he's got these big blue gloves on. And he's got a coat, and he's got his socks pulled up over his pants. And he's just looking. Now, let's just assume that this is the guy, right? Now, pre-pandemic, you know, I mean, he's standing in front of the fridge I'd go to, and you might go, and, you know, excuse me, sir, but, you know, do you mind if I just sort of step in for 2 seconds? And you wouldn't think anything of it. I don't know. This is a pandemic now. So while he's standing there, I'm like looking over, and I'm flitting around, and I'm trying to go like this. I'm not quite so sure. And I mean, 5 minutes must have gone by, right? And he's just sort of standing there. Till I finally stick a toe in, and I go, excuse me, but are you going to buy anything? At which point he looks around and he says, well, I'm trying to, but if you would just stop like rushing around like this and bothering me, I could make up my mind. And what happened was, I mean, you know, I went from 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds. And I don't know if, you know, you can relate to that, if either you've been in a situation or you've seen it. But that's the kind of stress that we're talking about and what's been happening. I don't know, if you look at the sum total of what's been happening, that the pandemic is necessarily the cause of all of this, but it is adding all of these extra layers to things. And so our patience levels are coming down, which means that there are things that we need to do if this is not going to continue driving us to distraction, to rebuild our patience. And it's not just a question of just sitting there and just factoring in extra time. There are 3 things that are happening in general that I'm going to share with you. There are others, but there are 3 main ones that I want to share with you today. The first that is wearing on our ability to remain patient because we're tired all the time and that our filters come down is, in fact, too much screen time. And there's something very particular about what happens during screen time. And it's something called retrieval fatigue. So what retrieval fatigue is that because a screen is focused so much on what's happening here in what we call, our frontal lobe, which is all the logic centers of the brain, even if I have a conversation with somebody, most of that conversation, I have to go back and retrieve something, either some information, a memory, maybe I don't remember the person's name. I'm thinking, okay, who is this person I'm talking to? Some of the memories may be from 5 minutes ago in a conversation. Other memories may be from 30 years ago if I'm, catching up with an old friend. What's happening with the screen, though, is this retrieval, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, is brought into overdrive. So, I got some new glasses, they got the blue blockers on and all that, and certainly I don't have as many headaches, but much to my surprise, it's not helping with my fatigue. So it's not just because we're working our eyes harder, it's because the logic center of our brain, we're working almost solely there when we're on the screen. So the antidote to that is to be really aware. If you have to be on a screen, you have to be on a screen, but understand that that's going to come with a cost, and that there is not anything that you can really do except to factor in rest and accept the fact that if you're on a screen a lot, chances are good you're going to be tired a lot. There is also something about being on a screen that's called screen apnea. You know what sleep apnea is? Everybody's heard of that, right? Where you don't sleep properly. And what sleep apnea is minor interruptions in your breathing patterns, which causes you to wake up and you never get into that deep sleep. There is apparently, in this whole retrieval thing, a screen apnea that is created. Which means that while I'm on a screen, I'm not breathing as efficiently as I would normally. The antidote to that, I'm being taught, is that if I'm on screen, let's say I'm working with a client online and I'm doing counseling and this is very intense and I have to listen intently, is to be actually much more aware about how I'm sitting and to be as straightforward as possible to actually take all the pressure off my chest to breathe that much better. No different than, let's say, an athlete would have to be very aware of the athlete, he or she would have to be very aware of their posture, in order to breathe adequately. So how you sit isn't just about ergonomics and making sure you don't get carpal tunnel, let's say, if you're typing. It has also to do with your breathing. And the last one is that living how we're living, although somewhat less now, but certainly this would have been true during the lockdowns, we are sensory deprived. Now, I don't mean just sensory deprived because, we are watching the same things over and over. We'll get into one of the exercises, but I am talking that our sense of smell has been diminished, our sense of touch has been diminished, our sense of taste may be diminished, our sense of hearing, because we are, because of reduced life, listening, looking at, tasting, touching, and smelling the same things over and over and over and over and over. And when we get to the end of the exercise today, we'll talk a little bit about what to do to counteract that and what it's doing. In a moment, we're going to take a break, and we're going to go over and we'll do our small group work. For you folks at home who have this PowerPoint presentation, there are 3 questions that I'd like you to consider. How many different stressors can you name in your life? From the big things to the minor things that get on your nerves. I mean everything. It's easy to name the really, really big things. But in a moment, we're going to take more than just a few minutes to look at this. Because you might be surprised. Usually when you're carrying a heavy load, it's the little things that finally get to you. Witness 2 men trying to buy some pizza. Right? And it ends up in an argument in the middle of the aisle. Are there new stressors that have appeared that weren't there before the pandemic, whether they're because of the pandemic or not? And to have a more positive look, maybe there are stressors that you thought you still had that if you really take a good look aren't there anymore. It's not all doom and gloom, right? Two guys eventually bought their pizza, right? Eventually got there. It's just a question of understanding how to relive these things. You take a hard look at it. There may actually be some things that you were worried about 2 years ago that you're going to say, I don't need to worry about this anymore. It's just not there. It's just an old habit. So we're gonna take some time away. At home, you're going to be. I'm asking you to take some time to make a list, because making a list actually takes things sort of out of your head onto a page, and then you might be surprised with what you see. That's called mapping. And if you want to know more about what mapping is, again, you can talk to Carolyn, you can talk to myself. And what we're going to do now in the next 10 minutes is I'm going to take you through 3 different techniques to sort through the stress. So if you've done this from home, by now you should have gone through your 3 questions. How many different stressors can you name? Are there new stressors that have arisen during the pandemic? And are there stressors that you can now leave behind? And whatever your list looks like, and whatever you've shared with us in our learning circle, I want you to just pick one now. Just one. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go through. And then the idea being is if you can understand how to apply these 3 things to this one stressor, well then, you can practice this at home. For everybody, the one thing that I want us to get to a place now is to remember that stress, regardless if it's big stress or little stress, whether it's because of the pandemic or it's just stress in general that has been ramped up because of the pandemic, stress is stress is stress. The difference being now, because of the things that I mentioned at the beginning, because of the retrieval fatigue, that we're constantly going back and forth in our brains, so that we're placing a lot of emphasis on our frontal lobes, so we're just generally tired. Everybody in our small group mentioned bad communication on one level or another. That's happening all over the place. Because of this, what we call screen apnea, that we're not breathing necessarily so great, so that contributes to our fatigue. And because we're sensory deprived, that contributes to our fatigue. We are generally tired. What does that mean? Like the example of buying that pizza, where I lost my mind over something that simple, and literally I did. We were going to call for the manager, it got so bad. It's because we're tired all the time. And when we're tired, our filters come down. We need to be mindful of that. So I'm going to go through 3 techniques. The first one is called dropping anchor. The second one is called resist. And then we're going to talk about being mindful about our sensory deprivation. None of these techniques are going to cause your stress to go away. It's not going to fix the pandemic. What we say when we're talking about psychotherapy and doing counseling is that the pain is still there, but we reduce the suffering. The stressor is still there, but we reduce the impact. So there's a level of acceptance that comes with that. Okay, so we're going to do the first one now, which is called dropping anchor. Got your little stressor in your head that you remember? And Dave, you don't have to worry about this. I'm just going to bring my chair up and I'm going to sit back down. So if my head's been cut off, it's okay. I'm going to invite all of you to you're in your pews, to sit down comfortably. Remember that breathing thing that I talked about and the apnea? We're going to get rid of that. The next thing I'm going to ask you to do, if it's possible, get your feet down on the ground and your back as straight as possible. The feeling of groundedness is part of this exercise. So as the exercise says, in the middle of a stressor where things are swirling, we're going to, like in a boat, we're going to drop an anchor, which doesn't cause the storm to stop, but at least your boat's not going to go adrift. So the idea of being grounded is to simulate that. There are people who say, make sure your hands are here on your knees. Personally, that doesn't work for me. So what I'm going to tell you is just have your hands be comfortable in any way that they are, with an emphasis on being comfortable. Because your hands represent what you receive in. Okay? This is where what we would say is your sense of agency comes from. You're grounded, and there are certain things within your power. Now you have a choice to make. If you are a person who tends to look inward when you're sorting things out, then I'm going to ask you to just take a pause, because we're going to let the extroverted people have their little extra step. So if you're someone like me who likes to think outwards, I'm going to ask you just to take 10, 15 seconds to scan the room. So it's almost like you're recording the images. Don't overthink it. Just scan the room. Okay? Good enough. And now, I'm going to ask you, we're going to do this relatively quickly. Close your eyes. If you are the person who is looking inward, hold on a second. And if you are the person who's looking outwards, just be mindful of not overthinking what you've seen. And I'm going to ask everybody now to bring in the stressful moment into their thoughts. If you are someone who has looked around the room, what image is coming to you immediately? Don't overthink it. And if you are somebody who is looking inward, can you pinpoint a certain place in your body? Your feet, your toes, your knees, your shoulders, your hands, your chest. Okay, so we're going to pull everybody out. Obviously, this is something you could do over a 15, 20, half an hour, 45, hour-long period. I used to know a guy who did Tai Chi. He could meditate in the pool for 4 hours. I certainly don't have that kind of patience, but just to show you, it doesn't really matter. The idea, though, is to be able to pinpoint it. So, for example, as I scanned around, I saw, because I looked outside, I saw up to my left the big quilt, the big windows. There's a camera, of course, which is something that I have a relationship with now, the piano, another quilt, and there's a tiny little cross. As my stressors started to come in, that's actually the cross is what I remembered. So what I'm going to do now is on my way home, I'm going to think, okay, the stressor that I had in my mind, what does the cross symbolize in terms of that? And then what happens is I get a distance from it. I can see the stressor for what it is. It is not overwhelming me in the same way that when I didn't take time to pause when I went to buy that pizza. Taken to its logical conclusion, as I start to think about the different images, the next time I go into Metro to buy a pizza and I see the same guy, hopefully I remember the cross and I don't lose it. If you're an introverted person, it's the same thing. The idea is that you pinpoint where the feeling is so that it's not swirling. You can actually feel it and see it and have a relationship with it. Depending on who your pop psychologist is of the day, it's like inviting that emotion into the room, saying, you can be in this sanctuary with me, but you know what? You're going to sit right there. You're not going to talk too much, and I will get to you in a second because I have other things to figure out. I'm carrying multiple stressors. So that's called dropping anchor. Okay, and that's a mindfulness technique that comes out of something called acceptance and commitment therapy. That's something that you're going to carry forward now into this next technique. And this is called resist. Resist, and when you get your slides at home, you'll see it, is an acronym for the following process when a stressor comes and you're starting to feel that pit in your stomach or that tightness in your chest, and you're wanting to be able to act out that distance that you've just identified. So the first R in resist is reframe, which means take a moment to consider all the reasons why you might be feeling stressed. The guy with the pizza. Am I really angry that it's taking an extra 5 minutes for the pizza? Do I really think, there's something wrong with this guy, or maybe he's just having a bad day too? And to sit down and to rethink all the other logical reasons that something may be happening, so you don't fixate on where maybe your sense of guilt or your sense of frustration is coming that is narrowing your thinking. That's the first step. The second is to engage in a distracting activity for a few seconds. So once you've done that, leave it and just get up and maybe just move a bit, move to the left or to the right, or change rooms, or go wash a couple of dishes, or whatever it is. Just distract yourself. S stands for someone else. Do something nice for someone else right after. Could be as simple as writing a text message to somebody saying, I'm really glad you're my friend. Glad to have you in my life. RESI, intense sensation. There are various ways you can do this. The simplest, safest way, go run your hands under some cold water and let yourself feel that sensation. All of these things are making use of what you've just done in the dropping anchor technique. Now it's coming out in your actions. S, shut it out. Now, once you've got this space from your stressful situation, is there something simple that you can do right now? Heavy emphasis on the simple. So, for example, I was on the weekend, I'm still ruminating about how my supervision went. I've taken some time to think about it, and there it is. It's Saturday morning, and I'm still ruminating about it. What do? The simplest thing for me to do is to write a one paragraph with a one line recognition of what my professors had done for me this semester, and to thank them. Simple. And now I put it aside. I'm not going to get to it until next Thursday, when my next supervision is. T. Think neutral thoughts. This is a tough one. Stare out in space at a blank wall, look at the floor, whatever you can do to just literally zone out after this. And there's one more T with resist. There's two T's in it, you'll see. Take a break. Put it aside completely. Do something totally different. Listen to a piece of music, maybe. Just whatever you need to do to rest. Close your eyes, take a 5-minute nap. If, for whatever reason, you at home and you here with us today, if you're finding yourself in whatever stress you are, going over this resist technique over and over and over and over, and it's cycling in on itself, it would be a good time to talk to somebody. If I continually start to lose my temper with people who are buying pizza, and Buddy keeps coming in and staring at the fridge, and we keep bumping into each other at the same time, we might want to talk to somebody about those habits. Right. You understand what I'm saying? The last one is to be mindful of our senses. So somebody in our small group mentioned about just how they had noticed when they were going for walks that some of the smells were coming back in a certain way. I mentioned earlier that we are sensory deprived because we are doing the same things over and over and over again. And so certain things that maybe we enjoyed tasting are becoming old hat because, well, our diets are not as varied as they used to be, assuming that we're actually even able, some people, to buy regular groceries with the cost of food and those kinds of things. Maybe there are people out there who are certainly eating a lot more peanut butter and bread than they used to, and that's a real thing. The thing is that our senses, these are the things that come out of our limbic system, that come to our frontal lobes, our cognitive sides, that help us make decisions about staying safe. So, if you lose maybe one of your senses, so let's think about people who are sight impaired, about how their hearing is so much better, right? Then you can adjust. Start to reduce your senses too much, and you're going to be in a constant state of stress just because your fight or flight mechanism is constantly kicking in. It's like a trick, right? Because you're sensory deprived, you feel as if you're not safe, whether you know it or not. So the antidote to that is to take good care of your senses. So, a sense of smell, burn candles, put cinnamon on the pot. I'm not going to suggest you would eat your emotions, but do try and vary the tastes of what you're eating. And you don't even have to taste a whole lot, right? A little bit can go a long way. One of the things I like to do is I put different flavors in the water I drink. Okay? Sense of hearing, same kind of a thing. There's a guy I go to school with, he big rap music fan. He's had to start listening to classical music. He's got to change up what he's listening to. Sense of touch, bring things around, and just take some time. Just it's like feeding your spiritual immune system, so that will counteract some of the fatigue. So you go from dropping anchor, the idea of being able to focus in on something so you can have this conversation with what's stressing you, the resist technique, which is just a way to put that into action, and then this idea of taking good care of yourself. So, next week we are going to be talking about how our relationships and the way we act in the world is being impacted. We'll carry some of the things that we have learned today forward. And that concludes our time today. Thank you for joining us. Again, if you have any questions from Orleans United Church, feel free to contact Carolyn Penhale. If you have, or look, La Madeleine. If you have any questions beyond Orleans United Church, get a hold of us. If you're watching this online, obviously you know how to get a hold of us at St. Andrews. I'm Reverend Lukacs from St. Andrews United Church in Buckingham. Thank you very much to David Patterson, who's been in the sound booth, and to Orleans United Church for hosting us today. And we'll see you next time, online and in person.